Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this certain expectation of precision.
Right. It feels very close to engineering, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you break your arm, the x-ray reveals that unmistakable, jagged white line right across the bone, and the doctor simply points to the screen.
You can physically see it.
Exactly. The fracture is right there. It's completely binary. Like the bone is broken or the bone is intact. The problem is visible. It can be categorized. And there is a clear linear protocol for fixing it.
And we find an immense amount of comfort in that kind of visibility.
Yeah.
It gives us the illusion of total control.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if we can see the problem, we just assume we can manage it.
But the complication really arises when you step out of the realm of physical orthopedics and into the incredibly murky landscape of human suffering.
Right, where there are no x-rays.
Exactly. When you're navigating the absolute hardest parts of life, I mean, profound grief, chronic and debilitating illness, or just that creeping, pervasive feeling of being an imposter who is entirely unworthy of any good thing, that metaphorical x-ray machine is just useless.
The images come back totally blurry.
Yeah, and the pain is undeniably real. I mean, perhaps even more real than a fractured radius, but the protocol for fixing it is entirely absent.
It's just a void.
Right. So how do you actually navigate those moments where the baseline human instinct is just to, pull the ripcord and escape the discomfort?
Well, that is the universal wall we all eventually hit.
Yeah.
The pain, whether it's radiating from a failing physical body or a shattered emotional state, it demands some kind of answer from you.
But the answers are usually terrible.
They are. The answers we typically reach for a simplified medical chart, a therapeutic platitude, or like a cliche sentiment on a greeting card. They are completely insufficient for the depth of that void.
And that void is precisely what we are exploring today. We are stepping way out of the modern era and diving into a stack of historical source material that addresses this head on.
This is a really intense deep dive.
It is. We have two very specific letters authored by a figure named Lawrence. The first is designated as Letter 11, which was written in October of 1689.
Okay.
And the second is Letter 12, written just over a year later in November of 1690.
And what makes these texts hold so much weight is the context of their creation. I mean, Lawrence is not writing abstract, sanitized philosophical treatises meant to be debated safely in some university library.
Right, this isn't an academic exercise.
Not at all. He is writing directly to individuals who are currently in the absolute trenches of intense human misery.
Real people, real problems.
Exactly. The first letter is directed toward a situation of acute grief, and the second is addressed to a person enduring severe, agonizing physical sickness.
So our mission for this deep dive is to extract the wisdom embedded in these two texts. But the warning I have to issue up front is that the wisdom we are going to pull out of these letters is incredibly challenging.
It really is. It's not going to be comfortable to hear.
No. It runs entirely counter to almost every instinct we have been taught about how to handle pain in our modern era. We're looking at Lawrence's arguments about how to interact with the divine, how to suffer with an actual purpose, and really how to fundamentally redefine the concepts of paradise and hell.
Lawrence is going to completely upend our default modern therapeutic models today.
He's not messing around.
No, he doesn't offer a gentle three-step program for feeling marginally better. He is asking the recipients of his letters, and by extension you, the listener, to completely tear down and rewire how you perceive your own suffering and your own attachments.
So let's step back to the autumn of 1689 and look at Letter 11. This text immediately tackles the incredibly complex intersection of deep human grief and divine hierarchy.
It's a heavy start.
Yeah. The letter is addressed to someone Lawrence calls sister, but the primary subject of the correspondence is a third individual who he refers to as Mr. X.
And the situation with Mr. X is one of profound loss. He is actively mourning the death of a very close friend.
Right.
He's in that initial devastating phase of grief where the entire world feels like it has just collapsed inward.
And Lawrence steps into this scenario with advice that is, honestly, on its face, incredibly jarring.
Very abrasive.
Right. He writes to caution this grieving man, stating that while loving a friend is an appropriate thing to do, Mr. X must absolutely not love his deceased friend with the love that belongs strictly to God.
He is establishing a very rigid boundary there.
Yeah, he is.
He asserts that loving God must be the absolute first priority, and taking the specific ultimate affection meant for the divine and applying it to a mortal human friend is, in his view, a critical error.
Well, I have to push back on this premise right away because approaching a person who is standing over a fresh grave and telling them they are loving their deceased friend too much or that they are categorizing their love incorrectly feels incredibly harsh.
Well, it feels terrible.
It borders on callousness. It
Hmm.
sounds like someone walking up to a person whose house just burned down and criticizing their architectural choices.
That is a great analogy, and it absolutely sounds harsh if we view it through the lens of modern emotional validation.
Which is our default.
Right. Today, the priority is to validate the pain above all else. But Lawrence is diagnosing something he views as far more dangerous than just the pain of loss.
What could be more dangerous than that level of grief?
Well, he is diagnosing a severe structural vulnerability in Mr. X's spiritual foundation.
Okay, but he follows up that structural critique with that line that feels almost transactional.
Which line?
He tells the sister that if Mr. X trusts God and knows how to make up for his loss, God will simply provide a more capable, more obedient person to serve him.
Yeah, that one.
I mean, that line is really tough to swallow. It makes human relationships sound like a supply chain issue. You cannot just swap out a deeply loved, irreplaceable friend for a newer, more efficient model.
I completely agree that the phrasing, a more capable, more obedient person, does sound like replacing a broken piece of machinery.
Exactly. Like trading in a car.
Right. However, if we look at the philosophical architecture Lawrence is actually building here, the focus is not really on the replaceability of the human.
Okay, then what is the focus?
The focus is on the infinite provision of the divine.
So you're saying the argument is that Mr. X's grief is rooted in a misunderstanding of where his comfort actually comes from?
Yes, precisely. Lawrence writes that God is full of grace and faithfulness, and he points out that God is the one who can change hearts.
Oh, interesting.
Lawrence's underlying premise is that God is the ultimate originating source of all good things, right? And the only truly stable foundation in existence.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So the fatal flaw Mr. X made was taking his ultimate reliance, like his core foundation for emotional and spiritual survival, and placing it entirely onto a fragile, mortal human being.
The implication there is that when you make a mortal human the ultimate load-bearing pillar of your life, their inevitable death doesn't just cause sadness.
No, it causes a total collapse.
Right, it causes a total structural collapse of your entire reality.
That is the core of Lawrence's warning. The devastation is absolute because the reliance was entirely misplaced.
But he's not telling him not to love his friend.
No, Lawrence is not advocating for sociopathic attachment. He explicitly notes, although loving a friend is what one ought to do.
Okay, so he recognizes the beauty of human affection.
Exactly. But he is drawing a hard, unyielding line at idolatry. He is arguing that you simply cannot give a human being the psychological and spiritual weight that only the divine architecture was designed to carry.
Because if that structural hierarchy is maintained properly, then the loss of the friend, while undeniably tragic, does not destroy the individual. The primary pillar of trust remains completely intact.
Because the divine is faithful in both this life and the next. So when Lawrence mentions God providing in a more capable person, he is really attempting to rescue Mr. X from a scarcity mindset.
Oh, a scarcity mindset. Like Mr. X thinks there's no more love left in the world.
Exactly. Mr. X feels that all goodness, all companionship, and all light have totally vanished from the universe because this one specific vessel is gone.
Yeah.
Lawrence is trying to pivot Mr. X's gaze toward the infinite abundance of the divine. He is making the case that the source of the goodness Mr. X experienced through his friend was actually God all along.
And that eternal source has not dried up.
Precisely.
You know, if we extrapolate that to how we operate today, it highlights a massive cultural blind spot.
Oh, huge.
We frequently do exactly what Mr. X was doing, particularly in our romantic partnerships. I mean, there is this pervasive cultural narrative that your partner should be your soulmate, your best friend, your primary therapist, your financial safety net, and your sole source of ultimate fulfillment.
We are effectively demanding divine perfection from highly imperfect, highly fragile creatures.
We really are. We are asking them to carry a structural weight they were never engineered to hold.
And they can't.
Right. And when they inevitably fail to be perfect, or when the relationship fractures, or heaven forbid, when they pass away, the resulting psychological devastation is catastrophic.
It shatters you.
So Lawrence's advice, despite sounding initially devoid of empathy, is actually a massive protective measure.
That's a great way to put it.
It is a demand to place the heaviest emotional weight onto the only structure capable of supporting it indefinitely.
But adopting that protective measure requires a monumental shift in daily behavior. I mean,
Yeah.
you cannot just intellectually agree that the divine is the ultimate foundation.
Right, you can't just nod your head and move on.
No, you have to actively move the divine from the periphery of your life to the absolute center. And this naturally brings up the second major theme of letter 11.
The daily practice.
Exactly. Once Lawrence establishes who must occupy the highest tier of affection, he pivots to the minute-by-minute mechanics of how to actually maintain that relationship.
And the daily application is where this philosophy becomes incredibly demanding. Lawrence refers back to previous advice he had given the recipient. He insists that they must constantly think of God,
All the time.
day and night, in moments of intense labor and in moments of total idleness. The divine is framed as being perpetually present, and Lawrence uses a very specific phrase. He says, God should not be left alone.
Please do not let him be alone. It is a stunningly intimate, almost vulnerable way to describe the creator of the universe.
It really is. Think about the social dynamics of hosting someone in your home.
Okay.
Imagine inviting someone you deeply respect and love over to your house. You welcome them through the front door, you guide them to the most comfortable chair in your living room, they sit down, and then you immediately turn your back to them.
That would be so awkward.
Right. You pull out your phone and scroll through social media for an hour, or you start aggressively scrubbing the kitchen counters, completely ignoring their presence.
Yeah.
You don't make eye contact, you don't speak a word to them for 3 hours.
That behavior would be socially abhorrent. It is an active insult to the guest.
Yet Lawrence suggests this is the exact behavioral model most people use regarding the divine presence.
He uses a nearly identical framing in the text. He writes, if a friend visits you, you would be embarrassed to let him sit alone. How much more the God who loves you?
It's so convicting.
It is. Lawrence is doing something radical here. He is dragging the concept of theology out of the high ceilings of a cathedral and forcing it right into the mundane reality of the living room.
And if we accept that premise, then the way we practice spirituality has to undergo a complete overhaul. Like, it can no longer be an event on a calendar.
Exactly. It changes from an episodic activity to a continuous, unbroken reality because the modern default is highly compartmentalized.
Very much so.
Interacting with the divine is a scheduled appointment, like an hour on Sunday morning or a brief 5-minute recitation before falling asleep.
It's treated like visiting a monument. You travel to this specific location, you observe it, you perhaps feel a fleeting sense of awe, and then you drive home and just forget about it.
But Lawrence is arguing against that compartmentalization. He writes that the requirement is to constantly remember him, unceasingly honor him, and live and die with him.
Live and die with him. Wow.
And he refers to this continuous state of acknowledgement as the glorious career of a Christian. Notice the elevation of the language there.
Yeah, glorious career.
He takes the most mundane human states, sitting quietly in a chair with nothing to do, or performing tedious, repetitive physical labor, and elevates them to a glorious career, simply by the addition of continuous divine recognition.
Let's analyze the psychological impact of actually sustaining that mindset. I mean, if a person were to successfully adopt this posture, what happens to their baseline levels of stress or their perception of isolation?
It would fundamentally change.
Right, because we exist in a paradox right now where society has never been more technologically connected. Yet the self-reported rates of profound, crushing loneliness are at historic highs.
The psychological buffer provided by this mindset would be immense. If you possess a core, unshakable belief that you are never actually alone, that you are perpetually co-living and co-dying with a divine presence that actively desires your company, the architecture of your internal world changes entirely.
You are no longer just enduring a miserable commute in traffic alone.
Exactly.
You aren't sitting in a sterile hospital waiting room alone. The unseen guest is occupying the passenger seat. The unseen guest is in the plastic chair right next to you.
And that alters the nature of your internal monologue. Instead of the mind defaulting to a spiral of anxiety or endlessly replaying a frustrating argument from 3 days ago, the internal dialogue is redirected into a continuous, silent conversation with this present.
It replaces the anxiety.
Yes. But Lawrence is very clear that this is not an automatic human setting. He says, if we do not know this, we ought to learn.
It takes practice.
It requires immense intentional mental discipline to keep redirecting the mind back to the guest in the room.
But maintaining that discipline when life is relatively peaceful is one thing, you know.
Sure.
Remembering the unseen guest when you were sitting in a comfortable living room with a cup of coffee is a manageable challenge.
The true stress test of this philosophy comes when the environment turns hostile.
Precisely. What happens when the house you are hosting this guest in, your own physical body, starts to break down?
This is where it gets really difficult.
Yeah, this introduces the second piece of the source material, Letter 12, written a year later in November of 1690. The recipient of this letter is a friend who is severely ill.
Letter 12 takes all the foundational concepts of continuous presence and divine reliance from the first letter and totally pressure tests them in the crucible of absolute physical agony.
And Lawrence does not ease into the subject at all. He opens the letter with a shocking admission to his sick friend.
Oh, it's brutal.
He states plainly that he is not praying for their healing. He tells the friend he is only praying for God to grant them the strength and the patience to endure the illness.
It is a breathtakingly blunt opening statement.
Well, I am going to remain highly skeptical of this approach because if I'm the recipient of that letter, if my body is failing, if I am in constant radiating pain, and a trusted spiritual mentor explicitly tells me they are intentionally withholding prayers for my recovery, I am going to feel profoundly betrayed.
Most people would.
Right. The immediate reaction is, I am suffering. The only acceptable response from a friend is to try and stop the suffering.
On the surface, it reads as a total abandonment of basic human empathy. To understand how Lawrence arrives at this stance, we really have to look at the severe dichotomy he sets up regarding how different people interpret pain.
Okay, break that down for me.
He draws a sharp contrast between his sick friend and a group he labels those who love the world.
How does the text define the worldview of those who love the world?
For individuals whose entire value system is anchored in physical comfort, earthly success, and tangible pleasures, suffering is categorized purely as a natural pain.
A natural pain.
Right. It is a biological error. It is a glitch in the system that must be eradicated immediately because it creates a barrier between them and their enjoyment of the world.
Because they just want to get back to having fun.
Exactly. Because the world is their ultimate good. Anything that disrupts their comfort is inherently evil.
So pain is just a meaningless obstacle to them.
Yes. But Lawrence operates on a completely inverted paradigm. He proposes to his sick friend that this severe illness is not a random glitch or a meaningless tragedy.
What does he think it is?
He defines it as a cross that has been handed to the friend directly by God. Furthermore, he goes as far as to call this pain a profound grace.
A grace.
Yeah, the text explicitly states that those who rely on God view sickness as God's mercy, meant to save people through it.
There is a vital translator's note in the source material that clarifies this specific point.
Right, the distinction is key.
The note specifies that the salvation Lawrence is referring to here is the salvation of the soul or the spirit, not the rescue of the physical body.
And that distinction is the entire key to Lawrence's logic. He views human existence through a dual-track lens. There is the temporary, decaying physical body, and there is the eternal spirit.
Okay.
In his framework, the health of the eternal spirit infinitely outweighs the comfort of the temporary body.
So the body is expendable for the sake of the spirit.
In a way, yes. He believes that the divine sometimes subjects the physical body to intense suffering as a highly specific, targeted mechanism to awaken, purify, or save the spirit.
So if we follow that logic, then his refusal to pray for physical healing is not born out of malice or indifference.
No, not at all.
It is because he views the illness itself as the necessary medicine for a deeper spiritual sickness.
Exactly. To pray for an immediate miraculous end to the physical illness would be, in his view, asking God to abort the spiritual surgery before the soul is fully healed.
Oh, spiritual surgery. That makes sense.
He is prioritizing the eternal outcome over the temporary discomfort. He reassures the friend, saying he will release you at the appropriate time.
But that demands total, unquestioning surrender to a timeline that the sufferer has zero control over.
Complete surrender.
And even if we accept the premise of spiritual surgery, this creates a massive friction point with the modern psyche. I mean, we have engineered a society that is fundamentally obsessed with eradicating all forms of discomfort.
Completely.
We have temperature-controlled environments. We have medications to suppress the slightest physical aches. We have algorithms designed to prevent us from ever experiencing a moment of boredom.
We view all discomfort as an absolute enemy to be defeated.
Yes.
Yet Lawrence is demanding the exact opposite.
Yeah.
He is arguing that by relentlessly fleeing every instance of pain, you are actively running away from the very mechanism designed to bring you ultimate eternal comfort.
That is wild.
He writes that those who understand the true nature of this spiritual surgery can actually experience its sweetness and comfort while still in the midst of the physical agony.
It is an aggressive rebranding of what suffering actually is. However, this radical acceptance of illness leads into one of the most dangerous and controversial sections of the text.
We need to tread carefully here.
Yeah. Lawrence gives his sick friend very specific instructions regarding doctors and the use of medicine.
And this section requires meticulous analysis because a superficial or out-of-context reading could easily lead a person to make disastrous, life-threatening decisions.
Right, because Lawrence tells his sick friend, do not rely on other doctors. He makes the claim that if the friend places more reliance on medicine than on God, the illness will actually be prolonged.
Which sounds alarming.
The immediate, glaring question this raises is Lawrence advocating for a total rejection of medical science? Like, are we supposed to throw our prescriptions in the trash, cancel our appointments, and just sit alone in a room waiting for divine intervention?
A close reading of the specific phrasing proves that he is not advocating for that at all.
Thank goodness.
Lawrence writes, whatever medicine you take, as long as it is permitted by him, you will get the benefit.
Oh, the phrase permitted by him completely shifts the context.
It does. Lawrence is not taking an anti-medicine stance. He is taking a fiercely anti-idolatry stance. He does not object to the physical substance of the medicine. His objection is entirely focused on the internal posture of the patient.
Right, where their trust is.
Exactly. He is warning against the psychological trap of viewing the chemical compound or the human physician prescribing it as the ultimate autonomous source of the healing.
This connects directly back to the architectural hierarchy we discussed in Letter 11 regarding Mr. X's grief.
The foundational logic is identical.
Yeah.
Mr. X was warned not to rely on his mortal friend as his ultimate foundation. The sick person is being warned not to rely on the mortal doctor or the physical medicine as their ultimate savior.
Right, because the physical medicine is merely a tool.
Yes, it only possesses efficacy because the divine permits it to work. Lawrence is asserting that God is the actual active agent of healing operating through the medium of the medicine.
So the error occurs when the patient elevates the human doctor above the divine physician. You are idolizing the instrument instead of the one wielding it.
And Lawrence makes the fascinating argument that this misplaced faith might actually be the cause of a prolonged illness.
How so?
Well, think about it. If the entire purpose of the sickness is to achieve spiritual refinement and break the patient's reliance on earthly things, and the patient stubbornly continues to place all their hope in earthly doctors,
then the spiritual lesson remains unlearned.
Exactly. Therefore, the medicine of the illness must continue its work until the patient's perspective shifts.
That is a harsh but logically consistent framework. Let's delve deeper into this concept of dual healing. Lawrence refers to God as the doctor of the spirit and the body. He clearly believes the sickness of the body is leveraged to cure the sickness of the spirit.
There is profound psychological insight embedded in that concept. Consider the psychological state of a person who is completely healthy, physically strong, and financially independent.
Okay, picture the perfect life.
In that state of optimal functioning, it is incredibly easy to construct and maintain an illusion of total autonomy. You believe you are the undisputed master of your own destiny.
You dictate your schedule, you control your diet, you manage your career.
Exactly. You feel essentially invincible. The world is a machine that responds directly to your inputs.
But the moment a severe illness strikes, when a person is suddenly confined to a bed, too weak to even stand up and pour themselves a glass of water, that deeply entrenched illusion of autonomy is violently shattered.
Completely dismantled.
The realization of your own utter fragility is just forced upon you. You cannot outwork or out-earn a failing biology.
And Lawrence views that shattering of the illusion as an immense gift.
A gift?
Yes, because the complete loss of control softens a hardened soul. It dismantles human arrogance and renders the person highly pliable. In that state of profound vulnerability, the individual finally becomes receptive to grace.
Because they have no other choice.
Right. They are open to the ultimate physician in a way that their healthy, self-sufficient, arrogant self could never achieve.
Because when that illusion of absolute control is stripped away and the pride is broken down, it leaves you staring directly at your own deep imperfections.
It forces honesty.
Yeah. Once you realize you are not the master of the universe, you also realize how incredibly flawed you actually are. And Lawrence beautifully illustrates this exact state of vulnerability through a highly evocative metaphor about attending a royal banquet.
This metaphor might be the most emotionally complex portion of Letter 12.
It really stands out.
Lawrence is reflecting on his own personal experience of participating in communion, which he describes as eating and drinking at the Lord's table.
And in describing his presence at this table, he refers to himself as a chief of sinners. He asks the friend to imagine a scenario where a major, guilty criminal is somehow seated at a king's banquet.
His specific question to the sick friend is, if a chief of sinners sits at a king's table and at the same time does not know whether his sins have been forgiven, do you think he would be happy?
To make that abstract concept visceral, imagine the internal reality of that criminal.
Put yourself in their shoes.
Right. You are a convicted felon. You know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are guilty of the crimes. Suddenly, without explanation, you are pulled out of your prison cell. You are still wearing your filthy rags, but the guards forcefully seat you at the immaculate dining table of a billionaire monarch.
The contrast is extreme.
Exactly. The environment is opulent crystal glasses, incredible food, a string quartet playing in the corner, but internally your nervous system is in a state of absolute terror.
Oh, you'd be sweating bullets.
You are consumed by questions. Do I actually belong in this room? Does the king realize who I am and what I have done? Am I about to be violently seized by the guards and thrown out at any second?
Yeah.
That level of sheer panic would make the finest, most expensive food in the world taste like ash in your mouth.
Because the environment might be luxurious, but the internal anxiety completely neutralizes any potential for enjoyment.
You couldn't even taste it.
Right. The dissonance between the perfection of the setting and the guilt of the guest is unbearable. Lawrence notes that a person in this situation must be very sad, and this sadness is irrepressible unless he trusts in his sovereign grace.
That concept of sovereign grace is doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
It is the only mechanism that resolves the panic. How does the criminal survive the dinner? They cannot resolve the tension by pretending they are innocent.
No, the king would see right through that.
And they cannot fix the situation by trying to quickly scrub their rags clean.
There's no time.
The only way to eat the food is through absolute, unwavering trust in the sovereign grace of the host. The criminal has to believe that the king is fully aware of their guilt, fully aware of their rags, and has deliberately chosen to invite them and feed them regardless.
And Lawrence takes this metaphor and applies it to his own spiritual state. He says he experiences this exact dynamic when he sits at the Lord's table. He is hyper-aware of his own flaws.
He knows his own rags.
He feels the crushing weight of being an imposter in the divine presence. He admits that this stark realization causes him intense pain. But then, he uses a completely paradoxical phrase to describe that pain.
He describes it as a satisfying pain.
Satisfying pain is such a jarring oxymoron. Why would the acute awareness of your own unworthiness ever be described as satisfying?
It is satisfying because it represents the ultimate annihilation of the ego. The pain stems from the stark, unavoidable contrast between your own deep flaws and the overwhelming generosity of the divine host. It hurts to look at your own failures so clearly.
It's a blow to your pride.
It is. It hurts to realize that you bring absolutely nothing of value to the table to pay for the feast. But the satisfaction arises from the profound, grounding humility of that moment.
It is a relief of the imposter who realizes they no longer have to maintain the charade.
Exactly.
The host already knows they are an imposter, and the host has offered them a seat of honor anyway. You don't have to exhaust yourself trying to earn the seat. You simply have to accept that it was given to you.
You can finally rest entirely in the unearned grace of the host. The anxiety of trying to justify your existence just evaporates.
This profound realization of grace, discovered precisely in the center of suffering and feelings of unworthiness, allows Lawrence to make his ultimate philosophical leap.
This is where it all comes together.
It leads him to completely redefine the very concepts of what constitutes heaven and what constitutes hell.
This is the absolute climax of Letter 12. Lawrence turns his attention back to his sick friend, a person who is enduring severe physical agony, and he delivers a statement that defies all conventional logic.
What does he say?
He says, "No matter how happy you think I am, I envy you."
Wait, really? He is a relatively healthy man, writing from a place of comfort, and he is telling a person writhing in a sickbed that he is deeply jealous of their situation.
Yes.
The logic behind that envy requires a total dismantling of our standard definitions.
Because Lawrence establishes a new, absolute binary for evaluating human existence. He writes, "If I suffer with God, even if it is pain and suffering, it is paradise. If there is no God, even the greatest joy in the world becomes hell."
Think about the massive paradigm shift that
A
requires.
massive.
The cultural consensus defines paradise purely through external circumstances. Flawless health, financial security, endless leisure, an absence of conflict. And hell is defined as a state of physical torment, poverty, or disaster.
But Lawrence completely rejects the idea that heaven and hell are geographical locations or specific combinations of physical circumstances.
He redefines them entirely as relational states of being.
Exactly. The only metric that determines your state is your proximity to the divine presence.
So if a person is enduring the most horrific, agonizing physical deterioration imaginable, but their mind is consciously anchored to the unseen guest, they are currently residing in paradise.
Because the union is there.
The pain is present, but it is superseded by the union.
Conversely, a person could possess limitless wealth, perfect health, and every earthly pleasure available. But if their internal landscape is disconnected from the divine presence, Lawrence argues they are currently existing in hell.
Wow.
The external luxury is irrelevant to the internal desolation.
He drives this point home by writing, "My only joy is to suffer for his sake." And there is a palpable sense of urgency in these final paragraphs.
You can feel it in the text.
Lawrence notes, "Soon I will go to him to give an account." He is writing with a profound awareness of his own impending mortality.
As he faces the end of his life, his ultimate comfort is not found in the hope of miraculous physical recovery. His comfort is rooted in a phenomenon he calls seeing God through faith.
That specific phrase is fascinating. He claims, "Many times I can say it is not believing, but seeing." Let's explore the mechanics of how a person transitions from simply believing a theological concept to actually seeing it.
This transition is the direct reward of the rigorous, exhausting mental discipline he outlined across both letters.
The practice.
Right. In letter 11, he instructed the mourning Mr. X to practice the continuous presence of God, day and night, treating the divine as an honored, ever-present guest.
And then in letter 12,
In letter 12, he instructed the sick friend to radically surrender their desire for control, accepting the illness as a purposeful cross administered by the ultimate physician.
So, when a person successfully synthesizes those two extreme practices, maintaining an unbroken awareness of the presence while simultaneously surrendering completely to the pain, the nature of their faith undergoes a mutation.
The theoretical abstraction becomes a tangible, sensory reality.
It becomes real.
The word believing inherently implies a gap in perception. You believe in something precisely because you cannot see it. It requires a constant leap of faith across a void of uncertainty.
Right, that's what faith usually means.
But Lawrence is claiming that through the relentless practice of presence and total surrender, that gap of uncertainty closes completely. The faith becomes so dense, so deeply integrated into his moment-to-moment experience of reality that it transcends mere belief.
It becomes actual sight.
It becomes actual, undeniable sight. He does not just believe God is using the illness. He clearly sees the divine hand working the scalpel.
Wow.
He does not just believe God is in the room. He perceives the presence as clearly as physical furniture.
He writes, "I know what faith sees," and he commits to living and dying within the safety of that absolute certainty. The translator's note at the end of the text clarifies the meaning of his final sentence. "Whether alive or dead, I am with God."
It describes a state of unbreakable, eternal union.
Yeah.
The fluctuating physical circumstances of the body, whether it is healthy or diseased, living or dying, are ultimately rendered irrelevant because the core union with the divine remains entirely intact through all of it.
We have covered an immense amount of historical, psychological, and philosophical territory today in this deep dive, all stemming from the urgent advice contained within these two 17th century letters.
We really went deep on this one.
We began by examining the strict architecture of affection, debating the seemingly harsh necessity of preventing human relationships from carrying the ultimate weight of divine reliance.
We then explored the radical etiquette required to host the unseen guest, analyzing how the continuous, unbroken acknowledgement of the divine presence has the power to transform the most tedious, mundane moments of life into a glorious career.
Which buffers the mind against profound isolation.
Exactly.
And from the living room, we transitioned into the sick room, where we wrestled with Lawrence's deeply controversial refusal to pray for healing. We unpacked the complex dual-track view of humanity that frames physical suffering not as a biological glitch, but as precise spiritual surgery designed to break the illusion of control.
Which brought us to the intense psychological friction of the King's Banquet, the satisfying, ego-destroying pain of realizing your own absolute unworthiness while simultaneously resting in the total safety of sovereign grace.
All of these challenging concepts ultimately culminated in Lawrence's radical redefinition of reality. The assertion that earthly agony endured in the presence of the divine is paradise, while earthly joy experienced in absence of the divine is hell.
It's a complete inversion.
The implications of this philosophy demand a complete restructuring of what we value and what we fear.
And if we accept the premise embedded in these texts, if the definitions of heaven and hell are not determined by your physical health, your bank account, or your external circumstances, but are dictated entirely by the presence or absence of the divine guest in your mind, then a startling realization follows.
What is that?
You are actively constructing your own paradise or your own hell right now, at this exact second, simply by deciding what you will pay attention to.
The philosophy we've explored today forces a very specific, inescapable question. When you finish listening to this deep dive, when the audio stops and you are left sitting in the silence of your own environment, well, who are you leaving alone in the room with you? Thank you for joining us as we explored this source material. Keep questioning the frameworks you use to view your own challenge.
For more spiritual resources, visit lokaken.ai.